So if anybody is online, just speak out because I can't necessarily see you when I'm going through the Bible study. And we got through a whopping 4 verses. I'm so excited. We read 7, but we only broke down the first 4. So I'm just going to go ahead and read those quickly to refresh your memory. Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And we told exactly why. We broke down exactly why a foreign king had permission from God to come and put a scratch on the front gate of Jerusalem. And we showed the whole history leading up to that point last time. And it is recorded. So you're always welcome to go back and review the first session that we had. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. Remember, puppet of Egypt, puppet of Babylon, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And we're going to see who his God is, by the way. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the big nose guy, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed, which means the royal family, from Judah, the capital being Jerusalem, and of the princes, which is why many believe that Daniel and his 3 friends were part of the royal family. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue in the Bible simply means a foreign language, of the Chaldeans. And that's where we stopped last time. We did read verses 5 to 7, but I'm just going to have you reread verses 5, 6, and 7. Whoever wants to start first, you're welcome to read verse 5.
And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years. At the end, therefore, they might stand before the king.
Let's go ahead and go counterclockwise.
Stop everybody.
No.
We had to figure it out.
I know it's the clock with hands on it.
Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
And unto whom the prince of the eunuchs, gave name to the gave names, for he gave them unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah a Shadrach, and to Meshach, and to Azrael Abednego, and Abednego, Sorry.
And to bed we go.
So welcome, Lynette. And I'm not sure, possibly Greg on the line right now. And if there's anybody else, just shout out. I can't see everybody who joins online. There may be a number of you.
And Melvin.
Thanks for joining. So we are breaking down Daniel chapter 1, verse 5 right now. And so the king assigned a daily portion of food and wine. This was from his own menu. This was a personal bonus to those individuals who made the death march and made it all the way from Jerusalem into Babylon. Some think it could have, it was certainly hundreds of miles. Some think that it could have been 900 or more, depending on what direction that they went. If they went straight due east from Jerusalem, it would have been a death march across the desert. Typically, and we're going to get into later in Daniel, what the king of the north and the king of the south is. Lots of discussion about what the king of the north and the king of the south. Real easy. From Jerusalem and Israel's perspective, where's the army coming from? If it's coming from the north, it's the king of the north. If it's coming from the south, like Egypt, it's the king of the south. And throughout Daniel chapter 11, when we get there, we're going to see how that changes from one empire to the next, and how Daniel chases that all the way through to right now, today. And I'm going to show you how events today are connected directly to Daniel chapter 11 when we get there. So Babylon was called the king of the north, because even though it was due east of Jerusalem, they would follow the rivers up, over, and around and drop into Israel from the north. And so their armies were considered to be the king of the north at that time. So Nebuchadnezzar had a feast for the survivors of that march. And these were the cream of the crop. Like I said, these were probably young men, often teenagers, healthy, intelligent. I don't know if they gave them like an IQ test before they started marching them out. But these were considered to be the best of the best that they were grabbing, and then they were going to incorporate into the Babylonian culture system, and even put these individuals. And Nebuchadnezzar was a very bright guy, which is why he ruled the known world at that time. He was going to indoctrinate and then put these individuals in charge of cities and provinces within the Babylonian Empire. Very, very shrewd and very bright. How he wasn't just taking yes people and bringing them up into his system. He was taking people that he was incorporating from other nations and other countries and cultures and molding them into being a Babylonian. I would say kind of like this country with the Irish, with the Italians, with all the immigrants. We pummeled them into submission to become Americans. And in the same kind of way, Nebuchadnezzar was doing this with the countries that he was incorporating into the overall empire. Very, very brilliant, actually. And you notice that a university degree back then wasn't 4 years. Probably it could be 2 or 3 years if we're really focused on, you know, the important stuff. And in Babylon, it was 3 years. And then your tester was Nebuchadnezzar himself, to see whether, can you imagine the pressure? You're cramming for 3 years in higher mathematics. Think about this. Everything was on a system of 60 in Babylon. This is where you get 60 minutes to the hour, 60 seconds to the minute. The whole system was Babylon. That all comes out of Babylon. You know, the compass. All of this was Babylonian. They were extremely bright individuals. These weren't cavemen running around. Actually, the ancient people, their intellects far exceeded ours, particularly if you go back before the flood. These are very, very bright individuals. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar himself was likely a master architect, which is why he felt that he had the right to be proud of looking out over Babylon and saying, look at what I have built. Look at what I have constructed. Look at what came from drawings that I put on the back of a napkin. And now look at the wonder that and the majesty of the city of Babylon. And we'll get into that story a little bit later as well. So they would stand before the king, these three individuals, and they were going to be tested and to see if they were going to pass. And we're going to see how they did at the end of chapter 1 here.
Or did they say that the footnote here is the language was Aramaic, the literature would have excluded mathematics, astronomy, and history, plus a strong dose of alchemy and magic.
So you wonder how the magi or the wise men show up, late. They're about 2 or 3 years late to find something that Daniel had told them 600 years before. From generation to generation, they had passed down when this odd appearance in the heavens takes place to the west. You chase it down because the most astounding thing on the planet has just occurred. And they did.
So if maybe Jesus was several years old then, right? What's the story of mangers and all of this?
So
That's just
The shepherds found him.
The Christmas thing, or
Yeah, the Christmas thing where you have the wise men and the shepherds, the
Right.
wise men were not there.
just the share.
That was like 3 years later, wasn't it?
Now, the interesting thing about the shepherds, and I'm going down a rabbit hole here, the
Sorry.
shepherds were the most despised in Israel because they were the stinky sheep herders and they weren't even allowed to go into the temple to worship. And so God himself sends a retinue, a choir to the stinky shepherds. And they were the only ones, there were no wise men, there was nobody else rushing in to congratulate Mary and Joseph on the birth of the Messiah. It's the stinky shepherds, the outcasts, the ones who aren't allowed to go to Jerusalem and go to the temple to worship, that God inspires and says, you know what? I'm gonna let you be the first witnesses of this particular event, but the wise men show up about 3 years later. And
What is that here? I guess.
it's not in the book of Daniel, but it is in the gospel between Matthew and Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're gonna have you into this.
yeah.
Next month. Yeah, sorry, I get the, oh, yeah, well, yeah, one of her, you know, gets to all the babies,
Well,
yes.
maybe 2 years younger,
Yeah.
3 years younger, Jesus would have been in that age
Right.
group.
Okay, but it, and so. Somewhere along the line, then Harry got the news of a possible threat,
The wise men told him.
and, oh, it was the wise man.
So some of this actually even comes out of the Old Testament, by the way, where there will be weeping in Ramah.
Mama.
And in the area of Bethlehem where Jesus was born, because all of the 3-year-old and younger babies are slaughtered by King Herod and his soldiers. He sends them in because the wise men from the Babylonian area
Okay.
ride in on their camels or whatever they're riding. And we hear that the most majestic king has just been born. And Herod says, wow, that's tremendous news, wise men. I tell you what, you go, route him out, and I want to come and worship him with you, so let me know. But an angel, probably Gabriel, comes and speaks to the wise men in the night as they're getting out of Dodge,
Right,
and says, it's a trick. I want you to go home a different way, and probably mapped out a route for them to get out of Israel without going through Jerusalem and by Herod's spies and his soldiers. So they probably did it in the middle of the night, and when Herod finds out, he's furious and says, well, okay, that's it. If there's some successor, even though it would be 20 years down the road, I'm going to kill him now so that he doesn't take over my throne. And this is typical of what kings would do back then. And so there was a massive slaughter of infants at that point in time in that area.
and it was, and so Jerusalem was how far from Bethlehem?
It wasn't far. In fact, here's an interesting anecdote, which is not biblical, but seems to fit the story. Bethlehem, see, the temple was running with blood all day long. 2 main sacrifices, and there were cows and sheep and goats and all kinds of animals coming in, being slaughtered all day long. And the location, you had to have a place to kind of like when you're driving down the 5. And you know when you hit the place where all the cattle are
Yes, yes,
are
yes.
brought together. For about 5 miles there.
Yes.
Well, that was Bethlehem.
Okay.
That was the gathering spot for all the sacrificial animals and the sheep. And it's likely, because there was no place in the inn, but we have the barn out back, that might have even been the inspection station for the sacrifice, because it had to be a sacrifice without blemish. And so there was an inspection that would take place there, and then they would truck them into Jerusalem for the sacrifice. Jesus may have been born at the exact spot where those inspections took place. I mean, when you start putting all the pieces together, it's absolutely phenomenal.
That's
I
crazy.
mean, and then, I mean, to be so close,
Wow,
and to have everything that would take 2 or 3 years before, babies get slaughtered or.
That's right. And there's also interesting stories about Bethlehem of David when he's fighting the Philistines, and there's a well in the middle of town. And his men fight through to get him a cup of water and bring it to him, and he just pours it out on the ground and says, I'm not worthy, for you guys trying to sacrifice your blood for this. So there's all kinds of interesting historical stories about that area as well.
And John, I went to kindergarten and then I went to the next thing and the next, Where was this story?
Oh, this is so good, Wendell. Just the more you dig into the Bible,
Okay.
the more rich it becomes.
It's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible.
Alright, then this book might be more interesting than I gave it credit for.
Oh,
Sorry, guys, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
all right, so
Okay.
now,
Wait.
now what's interesting when you hit Genesis, and I want to say it's Genesis 6, where you have the first 10 generations in the Bible. And when you break down the names, and they go from Adam to Noah, so you break down the meanings of their names, it tells you the story of salvation right there in code by the first 10 generations in the Bible. In the same way, I'm going to break down the meaning of the names of the characters in the story of Daniel for you right now. So in verse 6, we're talking about Hebrew names that had deep meaning that were given by their parents to praise God, to uphold Jehovah. And they were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah from the tribe of Judah. Judah, by the way, is where the city of Jerusalem is located, which is where for a long time you had the king of Israel from the days of Saul all the way through dozens and dozens of different kings, of course, until the Civil War, which we talked about last Thursday night. But Daniel, rich, deep meaning. It means God is my judge, which is the whole theme of the book of Daniel. And then Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are his friends. Hananiah means God has been gracious to me. And this is probably the mother, right? The mother has a son. She's been praying for a son. And this might have been more about the mother than her son, but she names him Hananiah because God has been gracious to me. It's a praise. Mishael means the powerful one of God. So this parents wanted him to be like a warrior for on behalf of Jehovah, right? We want you to be a strong son in the faith, and so we're going to name you Mishael, the powerful one of God. And then Azariah is going to be the help of Jehovah, or Jehovah is my succor, which is an old King James, old English word for assistance, basically. So God, I am the help of Jehovah, or Jehovah is my help. And so they are all from one tribe. There's 12 tribes, right?
Right.
Even though when you go through the Bible, every time you go through the tribes from Exodus through Revelation, they're listed differently. And sometimes you grab tribes that are sons of Joseph, as an example. And it depends on who was in rebellion. You have to do a Bible study as to why in the world do you list the 12 tribes this way? And then here you list it this way, and then we go to Revelation, they're listed this way. We took a look at that when we went through the book of Revelation. But the tribe of Judah is where the kings, of course, are going to come through. These guys lived in Jerusalem, which is what Nebuchadnezzar attacked. And they're basically dragged out of Jerusalem after identifying them as these are the cream of the crop here in Jerusalem. We want to get them out of the country. We're going to take them back to our country, and we're going to indoctrinate them in all the ways Babylonia. I'm thinking of Steve Martin with an arrow going through his head.
Yeah.
Doing this type of thing back in the 1970s.
What, now, is this the first time, we hear about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Yes, in verse 6.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you want to take a look at the map, more people are looking at where Israel is on the map based on what's going on in the Middle East right now. But this is Israel at that time. You have the pink, which is the kingdom of Judah, kind of down toward the bottom. And Jerusalem is up toward the top. Remember how we talked about civil war last Thursday? Israel divided into, ironically, the kingdom of Israel, which is completely different than the kingdom of Judah, which is to the north. And you had different kings in the north and different kings in the south. You can see the green there, which is the Syrian Empire, which rolls in and takes over basically the kingdom of Israel about 175 years after they come to Samuel and say, we're not so interested in having Jehovah. We'd like to be like all the countries around us. They look really cool, like, I guess, the Assyrians. So the Assyrian says, thank you very much. And within a couple generations, roll in and take over the kingdom of Israel. And then it is, of course, 605 BC, if you remember. that Nebuchadnezzar is allowed to come in and take over the kingdom of Judah, with the capital city, of course, being Jerusalem, which is that pink section there. And then you can see, just like today, yeah,
Is that the right map?
sorry,
Is that the right map?
this is the right map for that time period.
So when did
See if it comes-
Israel
Get some glass.
lose its, lose its land? In other words, and then the British ultimately, or the Americans, or whoever, Standard Oil, gave it back to them. When did they absolutely lose, dirt? It was no longer the kingdom of Israel, no longer the kingdom of Judea.
So, this would have been probably about the time of the First Crusades,
Okay.
where,
Yes.
the Ottoman Turks probably ride in and take over the Holy Land and push out the Jews for the most part, or kill them. And from that point in time till 1948, Israel really was a mix of different cultures, including Jews and including Arabs. And there's, lots of history obviously coming from Abraham, where you had two different sons. You had Isaac and Ishmael. And there's an interesting Bible prophecy about him, how he's going to constantly fight against his brother. He's going to be like a wild donkey in the desert. And that's kind of the direction that Palestine and the Muslim faiths kind of originate from that arm. And then you have Isaac, which is where Judaism and ultimately Christianity kind of comes from that arm. And never the twain kind of, this is kind of like oil and water between these two brothers dating all the way back to that time period.
And so there's kind of like, so we have this exodus from Egypt theoretically, right? And then we have, at some point, there's an exodus from the Middle East. I mean, where they then go to Europe.
Well, yeah. It's called the Great Diaspora, the dispersion.
Right.
And there have been a number of these, and Jews have been persecuted in every country, and there are also what are called pogroms, where all of a sudden, kind of like in this country where we don't like the Native Americans, so we're gonna go over to that island and massacre everybody. You drive on the 101 north into Mendocino County, there's a marker there by the road, Bloody Island over here. What in the world is that all about? Well, the settlers got up in the middle of the night in that area and decided, we pushed all the Native Americans out to this island. We're not comfortable with them being there, so in the middle of the night, they go out and kill everybody basically on the island. And the same thing would happen with Jews. They have just become kind of a despised today. We have so much anti-Semitism in this country right now, actually on both the left and the right now, that are both saying we really don't, all the woes of the world are the fault of the Jews somehow, which are 15 million people on the planet.
Isn't there, I think you said, that there's more Adventists than there are Jews.
It's over 20 million Adventists on the planet. So we have 30% more Seventh Day Adventists than we do Jews on the planet. And by the way, Adventists are going to get there as well. We're don't worry, we're going to be a hated people on the planet as well. Right now, like they say, if you don't stand up for them, the next thing is they're going to be coming for you, and there's not going to be anybody to stand up for you if you're not willing to stand up for them. So anyway.
Okay, so I have to
little history of the Jews here.
Thank you.
You'll notice the surrounding nations and tribes and countries which were constantly harassing and killing and doing damage to Israel. You have the Philistines. Oh, by the way, on the coast there, you see Ashkelon and Gaza and Ashdod. Some of these were where you had giants. These were towns where Goliath and his parents and his brothers came from this red area on the left side of the map there. Then you had the kingdom of Edom below. You had the Moabites there in the purple. You had the Ammonites. You had the Assyrian Empire. You had the Phoenician states, which, by the way, they were seafarers. They were phenomenal in navigating the sea.
Who was?
The Phoenicians.
Oh, okay.
So you had Tyre and Sidon.
Yeah.
And you have stories about this from Jonah and also from Paul, who was born up in that direction as well.
So you have chapter 6, verse 4, there were And there were giant, no, that's not it. Yes, there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that, where when the sons of God. I know this is not used in, because came in. Unto the daughters of men and they bare children up to them. They same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown.
So you have words like the Nephilim and you had demonic spirits who had sex with women and created these hybrids, and so you have all these conspiracy theories out there, and that's not what that text means at all. It means that you have the sons of God and you have the daughters of men. These were just the people who followed the direction of God. And you had those that rebelled and went their own way, and when they got together, they created a very rebellious strain of people who hated God. And it results in stories like the Tower of Babel and other things that we find in Genesis as well, ultimately culminating in the flood. Okay, all right, so let's making tremendous progress here.
Okay.
Let's jump into
I'll read the next one. Is but Daniel, this is verse 8.
well, let me break down verse 7 first here. So the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. And you wonder how savvy he was in dishing names out to the people who came in. If we just had a sheet, say, okay, your name is gonna be this, number 2, you're gonna be that. Or if he observed and saw that there were specific or special characteristics about them before he gave them names. Because names in the Old Testament were very important. It's interesting to see that God overrode names and sometimes renamed people as well. Like Jacob, for instance, became Israel. Abraham became Abram. And so there were specific and special reasons about having a particular name. So the chief eunuch is handing out names. His name is Ashpenaz, which means nose of the horse. So he apparently had a big honker on his face. And so his parents or somebody gave him the name nose of the horse. Maybe that was a nickname even. But Daniel became Belteshazzar, which is kind of cool. Belteshazzar. So that literally means he whom Bel favors. Have you ever heard about Baal?
Yes.
So this was actually Nebuchadnezzar's pet god. When it says Nebuchadnezzar went to his temple, Nebuchadnezzar took things from the temple in Jerusalem and put it into his treasure trove house for his god. This is the god of Nebuchadnezzar, Marduk, god of thunderstorms, also known as Jupiter, which was the 5th planet. This was the national Babylonian god, probably because it was Nebuchadnezzar's favorite. And I'm sure on his back door, he had a temple that was dedicated just to Marduk or Bel or Jupiter, depending on what name you wanted to give it. And I showed you that throughout all civilizations, whether it was Babylon, whether it was Greece, whether it was Rome, you have the same thing flowing through all civilizations. You see the same gods. So the same thing occurs back in the day of Joseph, where we can have the second to Pharaoh, who's considered to be a god in the empire of Egypt, the most powerful empire at that time. We can have number 2 being Joe. So he's going to become Zaphanath-Paneah, which means he who deciphers, who decodes the hidden, which is kind of cool. So you'd have, I want to say, 70 criers that would, they didn't get horses, they didn't get ponies, they didn't get camels. They had to be in good shape, and they go running in front of the chariot, which was the Pharaoh's, in front of Joseph, wherever he would go. And they would say, bow the knee to Zaphanath-Paneah. And so everybody would fall down on their face as the chariot would go by with Joseph, galloping along in the chariot there. But his name in Egypt becomes very different than Joseph. So Hananiah becomes Shadrach. This is the command of Ishtar, which was the most important goddess of war and love in the Mesopotamian pantheon of gods and goddesses.
Yep.
This was the most important one. That was a goddess. Mishael becomes Meshach, not so different, huh? Or Misha-Aku, who is what Aku is, or servant of the moon god, which you can't make this up, in Babylon is Sin. In Rome, the same god was Diana. You remember, great is Diana. This was in Ephesus. And so they thought that that the missionaries who had rolled in were desecrating their local temple or the local god, and there was a big riot over same god. And the symbol, you'll see this on flags, you'll see this on temples, is the crescent moon. So you can say that we worship whoever, but when you see this symbol, you know that the actual worship is around a god that dates all the way back to Babylon, which is the moon god. And you see this in all civilizations as well, known as Aku, known as Sin, known as Diana. It just depends on the empire and the civilization. It's the same god.
So Shadrach was named after the goddess of war?
That's correct. And love, which is a little ironic, huh?
Yes.
All right, so Azariah, he becomes Abednego, and maybe our nose of the horse here observed that this guy likes to write in his diary every day. I don't know. But a servant of Nebu or Nebo is the god of writing, literacy, and wisdom.
That's a cool.
And so that's kind of a cool name, but what they do is they strip you of everything. You're a teenager, you're impressionable. We can bring you into our university. We can give you the food right off the king's table. We can wow you with the glory of Babylon and see the king of the most powerful empire walking by, keeping an eye on you every day. And we're going to take away your religion. We're going to take away your culture. We're going to take you away from your parents and from your home, and we're going to take away your name. And we're going to give you a name which is Babylonian, which is going to mean something completely opposite of what your parents meant for you when you were born. That's what the Babylonian Empire would do.
So then this was a game plan throughout, just including, what we did to the original or the natives of America.
That's right. We
We just
brought them into our
put them in dormitories.
white
Sounds
schools.
familiar.
Yeah. Exactly.
May have eat vegetables.
Told them that they can't speak their language anymore. Yeah, exactly the same thing.
How long does it take to break them?
When you're a kid, not long.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is the idea. The younger, the better. All right. So Wendell, verse 8.
All right. Wait, I had it. Still in chapter 1, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Right there.
Yeah, right here, okay, but Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat or with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself.
Amen. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs.
I want you to read verse 10 as well.
And go ahead. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your face looking worse than the younger men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king.
And then you want you to read 11 and 12 verse 10.
Then said Daniel and Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink.
Okay, Lynette, would you like to read verse 13 for us?
Okay, yeah, verse 13. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see.
Okay. And is there anything else online that I can't see that would like to read? If so, verse 14. I gave you a few.
14. 14.
So he listened to them in this matter, and tested them for 10 days.
Melvin, you want to read verse 15 as well?
At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food.
Very good. And is there anybody else online that I can't see? I'll give you a few seconds for verse 16, otherwise we will move to Shauna. Verse 16.
Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse.
All right, so somebody took a picture here. There's Nebuchadnezzar himself saying, look. Look, actually, it's probably Melzar, although it looks like Nebuchadnezzar.
Nice look.
And Daniel, he's leading the charge there. You can see he's putting his hands out like, you know, this is not the fare that I grew up with in Jerusalem. You know, I appreciate you've got the oysters going there. You probably have a pig with an apple in it somewhere on the table. Yeah, so all this is the best of the best. It's interesting that the foods that we consider to be the finest and the delicacies of the planet are the ones that are probably the worst for us. Isn't that interesting? So the shrimp and the oysters and the lobsters and the pork and all those kinds of things which carry trypanosa and all kinds of fun things are considered to be the best. I mean, if you want to add value to food, you got to get some, some pork or something, in it to make it really good.
You got it.
So nothing has changed in 3,000 years.
No, and I don't think those kids were been throwing down like that, in that picture, they got to have this whole attitude.
Yeah, no.
What that came.
I think they came with humility.
Yes.
And they didn't go to Nebuchadnezzar. Obviously, they went through, the people that were in charge of them. So verse 8, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food. Isn't that interesting that he considered looking at it and how he was raised? He understood clearly as a teenager what was appropriate, at least from the Old Testament, from the Leviticus perspective on what God has designated for us to eat and what not to. Or with the wine that he drank, which obviously was fermented. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Yeah,
Well, no, I just came from it's affordable. The Leviticus 11, is that where they actually use the word alcohol? In other words, you're always seeing like wine, which is a romantic term, versus alcohol is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, so there's two different words for basically pressed grapes.
Okay.
And for fermented or old wine. And you see Jesus, in fact, saying, I'm not going to drink of the fruit of the vine until I drink it with you new in the kingdom. And so it's evident when Jesus is making that statement that he's talking about something that is unfermented.
Right.
And of course, in Proverbs and many places in the Bible, we have clear messages on don't look upon wine when it is red. And of course, we have strict requirements on the elders of the church, don't become drunk with fermented alcohol. And there's debates and books that have been written both ways where we think Jesus drank, fermented wine. We don't think that Jesus drank fermented wine. If I go with somebody who I think is inspired, who is Ellen White, and if she did receive visions from God, then her message is very clear that God would not be encouraging people to imbibe of anything that is damaging to them. And alcohol, let's just go with the CDC. Forget the Bible. Forget about Ellen White. The CDC says at this point, this percentage of alcohol is healthy for individuals to use. Not one drink, although I think that's the official, you should have no more than one drink now. But if you go with the studies and the reports that come out of health institutes, they're saying, you know what, no amount of alcohol is healthy for the human body. If you want the polyphenols and the positive things that you get from the grape that people say, well, I'm going to get it in my wine, why not just get it in Welch's? Because you're going to get it in spades there. You don't have to have the alcohol with that to get what the healthy thing of the grape is. But, we as human beings can pretty much justify whatever it is that we want to do.
Yeah.
So if we want to justify that, we think that Jesus drank alcohol, the chosen is a good example where the disciples are sitting around at the wedding feast and they're just getting sloshed. And that's the belief by probably, ironically, the chosen is put out by two different groups primarily, Catholic influences, and the whole set is Latter-day Saint. And Latter-day Saints are fairly well known for not imbibing in alcohol, and yet you have this show which seems to indicate that every time wine is put on the table, that it is fermented and we're going to drink until we're intoxicated. And that's the message, I guess, of the chosen.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, when it's just, you take away, the biblical, that everything is common sense. Alcohol, affects, with one drink, you kill your reptilian brain.
Yeah.
And so,
So if God is a God of love, let's lay all that aside. If we believe 1 John chapter 3, God is love, then he's not going to encourage anything that will break up homes, destroy families,
Right.
that will damage the intellect, that will make it so people cannot sit down and have a Bible study and intellectually understand what God is trying to speak to them, diminishes the force of the Holy Spirit. God is never going to put anything on the table that does that. And so just that argument alone, to me, takes out all the, the elders in the church and the deacons were allowed to drink, just not get drunk. Okay, all right. We're going to justify if we want wine, if we want whiskey, if we want beer, we're going to figure out a way to justify that, even though I think the Bible is clear. And Daniel, by the way, is clear in Daniel chapter 1 on I'm not going to put something in my body that pollutes, that defiles, that takes away my intellect and my ability. And we're going to see how it works out for Daniel and his three friends here by making that decision, as opposed, by the way, to all the other Jewish kids that roll in and are encouraged and say, you know what are you going to do? When in Babylon, do what the Babylonians do. And so that's what they did, as opposed to these four guys who took a stand. And we're going to see how it works out for them.
Well, I think this was like the first test God gave these four, and they passed it.
Well, the first test is maybe having their parents killed in front of them.
Yeah.
The second test is potentially a death march, where they had to be young and healthy and they had to figure out how to survive on just getting from Jerusalem, walking. Nobody's going to give them a pony to ride. They had to get to Babylon. And they had to do so with the right mentality and the right attitude. So I think that just like Joseph, who his first test wasn't in Egypt, his first test was getting thrown in a big hole by his brothers. And so there were tests after tests. And by the way, I don't believe that God wanted Joseph to be thrown in a hole in the ground. I don't believe that God wanted Daniel's parents to be killed potentially in front of him. There's things that God allows, but is not his will. The point is, Romans 8:28, for we know that all things work together for good for them who love the Lord and who are called according to his purpose, which these guys were. So even in bad circumstances, just like Joseph, good things are going to occur out of those bad circumstances.
Yeah.
But it's not God's will to have bad circumstances so that I'm going to put you in a ringer. I'm going to have you watch horrific things occur around you. That's not God's will, but he can have good come out of bad. All right, so Daniel didn't want to eat something offered to idols, more importantly, food that was unclean. Leviticus chapter 11, by the way, lays out what is clean versus unclean, or alcohol, and we just talked about that. So he went to the chief eunuch, Ashpenaz, and he asked for, do you have a different menu? Do you have a vegetarian menu here, Ashpenaz? And Ashpenaz said, what? We're Carl's Jr. We don't have a vegetarian, at least 20 years ago they did. Now they do it. Now they have the, the Wonder Burger or whatever it is.
yeah, because modern science, of course, has said, plant-based foods, et cetera.
Right. So once you grease it up, I don't know if it's that much better than
Yeah.
If it's in the same oil.
I'll stick with the plan base. All right, so verse 9, and God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king. And this isn't respect here. This is, I'm fearing for my head. Who assigned your food and your drink? Or why should he see that you are in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. You know, I kind of like my head where it is. But God gave Daniel favor and compassion. Both Daniel and Joseph, these are kind of parallel stories here, find favor with those who are in charge in the different empires and kingdoms that they find themselves in, which means God is ultimately in charge. So Ashpenaz says, I fear. The king had himself personally selected from his own menu the food that was going to be provided to the university students. This wasn't, you know, I'm going to delegate this to my head chef. Nebuchadnezzar himself, he's kind of a micromanager apparently.
Yeah.
He said, you know what, I'm going to make sure that these guys get the best of what Babylon has to offer, because I'm going to butter them up and show them that I'm giving them the same stuff that I'm eating. And I want them to not worry about food. I don't want them to worry about where they're going to sleep tonight. All that's going to be taken care of for you. You're going to be waited on, but I want a good product at the end of 3 years. So then, verse 11, then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over him, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants, test us. Give us a test. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink for 1 year. Well, for at least 2 months. 10 days. 10 days. If we come down with the flu or pneumonia or a dread disease, then you know that the vegetarian menu that we're asking for, the King James word and Amy's Bible was pulse. This is just like a vegetarian stew is what it meant. Lentils and beans and those types of things was what pulse was when you break it down to the actual meaning. Yes.
With them being in the desert, are we talking about like tubers and root vegetables, or are we talking like zucchini and melons and?
So they're not in the desert anymore, they're in Babylon.
Okay,
And Babylon was the most, it would have been considered one of the 5 wonders of the world at that time.
okay,
It had a river going through the middle of it. Which interesting, we see is going to be the downfall of Babylon as well. It had orchards. It could have withstood a siege with walls that were 100 feet thick for 10 years.
okay,
And had all the food inside the city walls that needed to feed everybody within the walls of Babylon. You could race 2 horses at the very top of the walls, 120 feet in the air, 12 stories high, all the way around Babylon, based on and the base of the walls had to be much thicker than the top of the walls, and you could race horse teams on the top of the walls of Babylon. They would have a food fight with you just to make fun of the fact that they have more than enough food in Babylon if you came and tried to besiege Babylon at that time.
all right, thank you.
So they had all the vegetables, they had all the food that you could possibly want. And Nebuchadnezzar, of course, in his palace, it was on steroids.
Wouldn't it be possible that the store lads, and were eating correctly in Israel, and then while they sojourned through the desert, they survived that simply because they were more fit, and so by the time they got 10 days really wouldn't be like 10 days for me.
Yeah, I'm sure it was weeks, to get from Jerusalem walking to Babylon, so they had to be pretty fit.
Right, but I mean, as far as like their diet, they'd already done a correct diet back in Israel.
Right, they were raised on it, yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So Daniel says, a week and a half. Just give us a test for 10 days. And then compare us to all the other Jewish kids that you collected in Jerusalem and see who looks better, them or us. That's gonna be an interesting, there you go, there's some good vegetarian stuff for you right there. This is what they're asking for right here. So you have broccoli and cauliflower and peas and raspberries, blueberries. You have looks like cherries. You have
Black beans.
some kind of citrus. You have lots of nuts.
Tofu.
I don't think they had tofu.
Look, they do have purple broccoli.
Alright, so verse 13, then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So, of course, these guys are also praying boys. And so they're praying that God will influence their health to ensure that when the final test is taken to observe their strength, their color, everything about them, that they look much, much better than everybody else in the room. So deal with your servants, either support the new diet or reverse it if it's seen as negative for Daniel and his friends. If we're sickly and pale and we can hardly stand up after just eating, because that's the thought today, isn't it? You gotta have some meat in your diet. If you don't have some protein, you're just gonna fall over. You might as well just give it up now. Doctors recommend that you have a good portion of protein to make sure that you're healthy, and that needs to come from some type of meat diet. I mean, this is what's being taught by many medical professionals today, that you need to have that. The fact of the matter is, there's two different ways to get protein.
Yeah.
You can get as much protein as you need on the previous page with the vegetables that you saw there, and the legumes and the beans and those types of things. The fact of the matter is that the only food that has cholesterol in it is meat. Plant-based food has no meat in it. You're gonna get it in animal products as well, like milk and cheese. It's gonna have cholesterol and eggs. But in plant-based foods, there is no cholesterol at all. Now, your body naturally does create cholesterol. So you can have high cholesterol and even be on a plant-based diet, but it's much less likely that cholesterol is going to be an issue for you if you are on a plant-based diet.
And so, big French probably have a dose of cholesterol.
I don't think there's any animal product in there.
Well, no, there isn't, but because, isn't it true that concentrate a soy product, which is like what a big French version is for a fish burger? Doesn't that, we can do this later, sorry.
Yeah, I don't think there's any cholesterol in anything that's plant-based.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it's plant-based, there shouldn't be any cholesterol in the food. All right, give us only vegetables to eat. Daniel 1:12. Verse 14. So Ashpenaz listened to Daniel in this matter and tested them for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, all the other Jewish kids are puking over in the corner because their bodies aren't used to the pork and the heavy meats and proteins and the oysters and whatever the king has on the table. They were raised just like Daniel and his three friends, and they're agreeing to go along with what the king wants, obviously, and what the food is that's being put in front of them. What are you going to do, right? But their bodies are not accustomed to that, and so they're having a much more difficult time than Daniel and his three friends. And the difference between the two groups is obvious. And verse 15. Verse 15. Missed it there. At the end of 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance, and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate. This is 10 days later. That's an amazing, quick study for a week and a half. And it's evident and obvious that they're doing much better than the rest of the university group. All right, so there they are. They're looking happy. They're looking healthy. And so they're allowed to continue vegetarian diet, essentially for the rest of their university degree. Verse 16, so the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables and I'm sure water. Didn't bother to bring in the food from the king's table for them anymore. Pulse is beans, lentils, peas, seed-grown food. So this is what they were asking for. And Daniel chapter 1 is about a commitment to a plant-based diet. A lot of people don't recognize that. The National Institutes of Health says this: The major benefits for patients who decide to start this isn't some Adventist, to start a plant-based diet are the possibility, it's more than a possibility, of reducing the number of medications they take to treat a variety of chronic conditions, lower body weight, a decreased risk of cancer, and a reduction in the risk of death from ischemic heart disease. I would say that that's worth investigating. And MD Anderson Cancer Center says this, not Seventh Day Adventist. Eating it, not Ellen White. Eating a plant-based diet improves the health of your gut, so you're better able to absorb the nutrients from food that support your immune system and reduce inflammation. There's a lot out there on eat these foods to reduce the inflammation in your body. Guess what? A plant-based diet does that. Fiber can lower cholesterol, which, by the way, there is no fiber in meat. You get fiber in plant-based products. Fiber can lower cholesterol and stabilize blood sugar, and it's great for good bowel management. Harvard Medical School, not Ellen White, not Seventh-day Adventist. Vegetarian diets have also been shown to support health, including a lower risk of developing coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and increased longevity. Plant-based diets offer all the necessary protein, fats, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals for optimal health, and are often higher in fiber and phytonutrients. All right, so we have group discussion questions here, which we'll go through real quickly here just as we wrap up. What convictions have you had to defend in your own King's Court, school, work, or family settings? And it doesn't have to be diet necessarily, but you can, pipe up if you want to discuss this or contemplate areas in your own life that may be different than what others are saying or doing that you think is the right way to go. So have you ever been in the King's Court and had to stand up and say, I can tell you I've done that at Ampla Health. When I joined Ampla Health, I said, I recognize that you have put me in charge of helping coordinate strategic planning for the organization, and that board retreats take place in wonderful places like South Lake Tahoe and, Las Vegas, which, okay. And that you do it over weekends, including Sabbaths. And I can't participate because I'm in church and I'm observing, putting work aside from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. And because that's a religious preference, they have allowed me to do that. As an executive team member, I'm not sure if everybody agrees with my stand, but it's a stand that I believed that I needed to make, and other Seventh-day Adventists don't necessarily make that stand. It's part of my job. I can justify in my mind that the mission for the organization is a good one. We're helping other people. And so planning and strategically aligning the organization, its missions and values over a Sabbath is okay. And you know what? I'm not going to judge that. But for me, I decided in the King's Court that I was going to take a stand and that I was going to ensure that I was going to be observing the Sabbath rather than participating in those work sessions. As for me, that was a decision that I made. You may make a different decision, but that's my King's Court there. So Daniel didn't demand special treatment. He asked respectfully and proposed a fair test. What can we learn from how he handled the request? And to Wendell's point, he doesn't think that they went in and berated anybody and said, we demand, we have rights here. We're entitled. You know what? We're 15-year-olds from Jerusalem, for crying out loud. We're part of a royal family. You line up and do what we tell you to do. No, I don't think they did that, right? So I think that they did it with humility. I think they did it respectfully. And I think that they were reasonable in, I would have asked for more time, frankly, but 10 days, was enough time apparently to get the message across that we can be healthy and we can get our schoolwork done and we can hit all the metrics and things that you're asking us to do with the menu that we're asking for. And then, of course, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has what we call the health message. And a lot of people over the years, including Adventists, have scoffed at the health message because this rolls out of Ellen White's writings. She first started having visions about things to remove from her diet and the recommendation for our diets. in 1863. Think about this. You're living on a farm, which everybody did in 1863. James would write in his diary, we just slaughtered the 250-pound pig and, put up lots of meat for the winter. This is what they were doing in the 1850s and 1860s as Adventists. And Ellen White grew up on farms. She grew up on having livestock, having them slaughtered, just like everybody in the country, having the chicken and the beef and the pork and whatever else. And then she gets this vision. And she probably didn't know how to cook. Like a lot of people say, John, how in the world do you eat vegetarian? What in the world did you have for Thanksgiving? I said, well, picture the table now. And you just take the turkey off. It's not that hard, but people just can't wrap their minds on how can you possibly eat a meal without meat? And Ellen White was the same way.
You even have stuffing.
So, that's right. So she got a big plate probably of, boiled asparagus or something. And she put it on the table and she stared at it for about an hour. And she tried to eat some and almost threw up. And she said it took her about a day and a half of like not eating before she could start eating a plant-based diet. That was how hard it was for Ellen White. It took her a couple days before she could make the adjustment to from taking meat out of the diet. And I gotta say, cheese is very addictive. And meat is very, very addictive as well. It's if you grow up on eating cheese or meat, I grew up eating cheese. I'm not saying it's the end of the world to have some cheese. And people who grew up eating meat, it's extremely difficult to then lay that aside. But forget about Seventh-day Adventists, forget about Ellen White. If you read the studies, all the studies are saying that there is merit in considering a plant-based diet, and it's going to reduce cholesterol, it's going to reduce high blood pressure, it's going to reduce cancer rates, it's going to do all these things for you, which is essentially what Ellen White was shown in 1863. Right?
Was it all in one vision?
No,
Multiple visions?
no, I think she had multiple visions, but the first one occurred in 1863. If you ever want to read the book,
At the Ministry of Healing?
1860s, it is Counsels on Diet and Health.
Right, okay.
Yeah. All right, so I'm over time. We got through, verse 16, I'm so excited. As the Bower has prepared. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this particular epiphany that Daniel and his three friends had, that the stand that they took, the testimony that they are sharing in Daniel chapter 1. We ask that you help us continue to learn, be guided and influenced by your Holy Spirit. I ask that you surround each person here with your presence. Keep them safe until we meet again. I pray this in the powerful name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Okay.